Welcome everyone to our monthly La Mesita webinar. Today's topic is presented by Dr. Irma Coral on traditional tobacco and e-cigarette use among Latino populations. We're going to be talking about where we are, how we got here, and how to intervene. So as usual with our La Mesita webinars, this will be fairly interactive. So please, if you can and feel comfortable, you'd have to turn your cameras on, and there'll be plenty of opportunities during the presentation for you all to jump on and participate. If you're having issues with your sound, you can hit that little caret next to your microphone and test your speaker and microphone. We do invite you to either type in comments in the chat or speak them throughout the presentation at designated times. I want to make an exciting announcement. So we've got our registration open for our Latinx Mental Health Conference, which is now virtual, thanks to COVID. But we're still super excited. Should be really great programming. You see here some of the speakers that we've been able to secure for our conference. These are some luminaries in the field of Latinx mental health. Sophia just put the registration link for Greensboro AHEC. So that will be the registration for the conference, and we'll be sharing out the Zoom link a little closer to the date of the conference. And we're also wanting to get feedback ahead of the conference from folks. So we're gonna send a form out to registrants to get questions that you might have leading into the conference, so that your questions can be fielded on the day of the conference by our speakers. So again, in that spirit of making all these virtual things as interactive as possible, we really hope that you get involved with us on that. So yeah, the link is there if you want to try to register. So we want to also say, as always, a big thank you to Greensboro AHEC. They provide our continuing education credits for all of our programming, including the conference I just mentioned. So hopefully you should all have registered with them to receive continuing education credits for this session. Yeah. So let's introduce our speaker today, Dr. Irma Coral. So Dr. Irma Coral comes to us from East Carolina University, where she's an associate professor and director of the Division of Behavioral Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Medicine. She is also the assistant dean for diversity and inclusion in the Brody School of Medicine. And we're going to get to see a glimpse of some of the work that she has done and the research that she's been involved in, which largely focuses on social and cultural factors associated with health behavior and chronic illness, as well as disparities, racial and ethnic, in terms of physical and mental health. So with that, Dr. Coral, I will turn it over to you once I can find my unshare button.
Okay.
It's on my other screen. But yeah, welcome, and you can give a virtual applause to Dr. Coral.
Thank you. Let me just get these fired up here. Okay, so this morning I'm going to be talking to you about both traditional tobacco and e-cigarette use among Latino populations. So I have 3 learning objectives for us. First, to discuss and review trends in tobacco use patterns and to talk about the historical context of patterns over time. I'll also be discussing targeted tobacco advertising in Latinx communities and also the influence of culture and acculturation on use patterns. Finally, I'm going to be also discussing how you culturally adapt some of the tobacco cessations that are the interventions that are empirically supported, and then we'll have an opportunity to apply some of those in some sample vignettes. So we're going to do a quick poll to get us started. And so the poll here is, what is your discipline or profession? Okay, excellent. So it looks like we've got mental health counselors and social work represented quite a bit, as well as some students and a few others. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay, well, let's get started. So to start, it's probably necessary to say what's probably pretty obvious, but tobacco use is the single leading preventable cause of disease and death in the US. We've known this for a really long time, and we know that the consequences of smoking are severe. Multiple types of cancer is probably the first thing that comes to mind for most people, but actually rates of heart disease and adverse reproductive outcomes really rival those as other really significant consequences from smoking. And for those of us that work in mental health, it also might be interesting for you to know that smoking exacerbates psychiatric disorders because it can interfere with successful pharmacological treatment of psychiatric conditions. Um, Today, probably about 14% of US adults are currently smoking, and that's a historical low, actually. So we've been doing a very good job in public health and other sort of related healthcare fields to reduce smoking over time. But that's an average, so that means that there are some groups that have significantly higher rates of smoking, and some groups have lower rates of smoking as well. So interestingly here, it's important to point out that among low socioeconomic status, among some ethnic and racial minority groups, and also among rural people, the rates of smoking traditional cigarettes are still quite high as in the 30s. And so that rate of 14% sort of obscures some of the complexities when we start to look at some of the subgroups within that kind of general group of smokers. Probably about 1,300 deaths every day are occurring from smoking-related conditions. And on average, this day and age, we know that smokers die at least 10 years earlier than non-smokers. Um, and the other reason that we've been thinking about cigarette smoking forever, really in public health, is the tremendous economic cost. So it costs the US more than $300 billion every year, and that's including in direct medical care for adults, but also in costs related to premature death and illnesses related to secondhand smoke exposure as well. So it's costly, it's incredibly related to lots of comorbidities and also for premature death. So it continues to be a major health concern, even though our rates are sort of at a historical low right now. Most adult smokers started out smoking when they were minors, so probably about 9 out of 10 smokers. And every day we still have kids that are trying their first cigarette and becoming a daily smoker. So the interesting thing too that's also happening is a bit of a shift. And so even though traditional cigarette smoking is decreasing, we're seeing an exponential expansion of use of electronic cigarettes. Between 2018 and 2019, there was an increase in about 1.8 new like million smokers of youth that started just in that 1 year. So the targeted advertising that's happening in these youth subpopulations is really interesting. We're going to talk about that a little bit later and see how the tobacco industry is kind of getting away with doing things that we've outlawed for traditional tobacco products. So again, sort of in summary, smoking continues to be a significant public health concern, and especially addressing use among adolescents and kids is a priority, because we know that once they get started smoking, it's a lot tougher for them to quit, and they're more likely to continue to smoke into adulthood. So I was telling you that about 14% of overall smokers in the US that's the rate right now, the prevalence rate. But what's your best guess for Latinx populations? What do you think the rate is? How are we doing in comparison to the average? Quick poll.
Think we can publish?
Okay, so the biggest guess is in the 10 to 25% range. Not too bad. Let's take a look and see the data here. So when averaged out across, and we start kind of looking like across ethnicity subgroups, overall, the prevalence rate for Latinx populations is about 9.8 at this point. So it seems not that bad in comparison to some of the other groups that have much higher rates. It's actually the second lowest smoking rate when we kind of look, so second only to Asian Americans. The highest rates of smoking have traditionally always been among Native Americans. But there's a rising new group that everybody has their eye on, and that's the biracial group that's sort of gaining and is expected to soon perhaps exceed the rate of Native Americans. So the country is becoming more multi-race in general, and so some of that is related to younger people that are picking up sort of smoking and other products. And so that's why that group is expected to perhaps overcome the group that's had the highest rates in general. But again, we sort of look at where we are for Latinx populations, and at first it seems, well, maybe there's not a reason to be alarmed. The interesting thing about this, though, is that for the tobacco companies, they've really perceived this as an opportunity. So some of the really interesting research that has been done in this area has, like they've gone back to dig up historical tobacco industry documents, and what they say there about Latinx populations as far back as the 70s or 80s is that, hey, this group is undermarketed. We should really target them more because nobody's really hit that audience of potential smokers yet. So some of the strategies that have been used traditionally for normal, like traditional cigarette products, we have targeted advertisements in Latinx neighborhoods. Also, the tobacco companies are really well known for sponsoring cultural events, not just for Latinx individuals, but really for other ethnic minority groups as well. They also provide scholarships for college, and they are really well known for making large political contributions to action committees that sort of focus on Latinx issues. So again, these 4 strategies are used really across minority groups. And the other thing to kind of note is for Latinx populations, some of the early advertising focused on just kind of changing the language, like you see Joe Camel there, un tipo suave, you know, so they just kind of changed up the words, not much of a difference. But over time, they've sort of switched more to using more like culturally meaningful themes. So you see the Winston ad over here, para compartir y saborear. So it's featuring more of kind of the Latinx cultural value of sharing and collectivism. So they've gotten more sophisticated over time, but you see that ad isn't new, like that's been around for a while, but they continue to kind of view this as a market that's very ripe for picking. And so right now their efforts are in the electronic cigarette sort of spectrum, and we'll talk more about that when we get to that piece here. So I was saying, on the whole, it doesn't look like we're doing that bad, but this sort of large-scale average really obscures within group variation that's happening within Latinx subpopulations. So in general, what we see as the themes from the literature is individuals of Puerto Rican descent tend to have the highest rates of smoking across studies. We also see a very marked gender difference where men are much more likely than women to smoke. We also see much higher rates among those Latinx individuals that are US born versus foreign born. But interestingly, we also see that there's a big impact of acculturation, with more time in the US typically leading to higher and higher rates of use. And so if we look again sort of at the chart here from the CDC, in general, we see that the sort of Caribbean islander Latinx populations are a little bit at higher risk, but we see also Mexicans not far behind the curve there. So probably Central and South Americans are the ones that have the biggest gap. And important here to also talk about sort of this gender difference, because this has really held up over time. This chart here is, I think it was published in 2016 is what that looks like it says, but it was from data from 2010 to 2013. And we've seen sort of this pattern, this split where men smoke more than women. Really kind of across the years, probably decades. And so for people that study sort of cultural patterns in smoking use, the reason that we think women smoke less is because there are more sort of cultural factors that keep their use low, especially in their native countries. And what I mean by that is there are social and behavioral expectations that are very different for women versus men, and smoking is much more stigmatized for women. I'm curious here to hear from you guys, from the audience, you know, based on your experience working with this population, or even your own personal experience. What are some of the things that maybe keep women from smoking? Like, what are the cultural kind of meanings that are attached to that behavior? Any ideas?
Folks can feel free to either unmute or type in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
So Mary Jones typed in your reputation goes down. Caroline Ginley typed in pregnancy. Isis said, I've always heard people say women that smoke are so unattractive.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So you guys are on to the right track. And so in general, you know, the way that we understand the cultural pressures is smoking is considered like a behavior of ill repute. So in a lot of Latinx countries, you'll hear people say like really only like whores smoke, you know, it's like that stigmatized. And so it's considered something that is not socially desirable, and it may hurt your reputation. So the stigma is quite high for women, and we think that that's the reason why we see a split really among all of the groups. You'll see that in some of these sort of nation of origin subgroups, though, that the split is a little bit closer than it is in some others. So again, and this goes to show that, you know, not all Latinx groups are the same. We certainly have country-specific kind of contingencies that impact that behavior. But overall, when we look at this group altogether, this is why we think there's that split in between the genders. So when we think about then acculturation, from a behavioral perspective, when we're thinking about smoking in particular, acculturation involves the removal of the social and cultural and environmental contingencies that maintain smoking at a certain rate in the home country. And now you've moved to a whole new context. And so what happens is those contingencies sort of get removed and are replaced by other contexts. And so what happens typically with acculturation or time in the US is smoking rates among women tend to increase quite a bit, because the stigma that is present in some of the Latinx countries just isn't here. You know, we have a much more egalitarian society gender-wise, at least where smoking is concerned. We certainly have, you know, other sort of stigmatized behaviors for women. That's true of all cultures. And for men then, what happens a lot is if the rate in the home country really exceeded quite a bit what the norm is here in America, we actually tend to see a decrease in smoking over time. So we sort of see the opposite sort of impact on the genders, but overall the rate begins to approximate the US rate over time. So that's a good thing for men, but not a great thing for women typically. So some initial conclusions then that can be drawn. In general, the groups that are most at risk for tobacco use. So among new immigrants, we really want to be thinking about everyone in that first generation, but especially women because of the pressures of acculturation. So for the reasons I just spoke about. And also we want to be thinking about individuals of Puerto Rican descent because we know that they have sort of the highest rates of all of the other groups. And then once we get sort of to the next generation among those that are born here in the US, we want to be especially thoughtful about adolescents, especially those that may be experimenting with emerging products. So we'll talk more about them next.
Dr. Coral, yeah, I guess that was a question. Like all of these things you're presenting, Guyan Chambliss asks in the comments. We're talking these things you presented about traditional smoking, not necessarily with the new vape products or e-cigarettes.
That's right. So we're about to get to those in a second.
Thank you.
Yeah. So when we look at sort of where we are with traditional products among adolescents, again, here we're seeing all-time lows. So the rate for the whole country in 2019 was about 6%. So again, the lowest it's ever been. But again, that overall sort of average obscures some of the complexities with the behavior. Here we also see that boys are more likely to smoke traditional products than girls. Is a lot more common in those that are in their late teens versus their early teens. And then we see much higher rates among those that are low socioeconomic status and also those that are ethnic minorities in the US. And so when we look at just adolescent smoking of traditional products, what we know now is access remains the #1 reason why people begin to smoke. So if you can get your hands on traditional cigarettes, you're at way higher risk than those that cannot get access. But access is actually easier than you might think. It is illegal to sell cigarette products to minors in the entire country, but studies that have been done to check on merchant compliance with the law shows quite a variety of sort of norms across states. And we see that it is actually much more likely that they sell to minority kids than they do to white children. So access, like it's still like a big thing that we're continuing to worry about, and merchant interventions are what we're sort of focusing on for that. But the other things that are really critical here too is the advertising piece and also risk perception. And these two things now begin to be really important where e-cigarette use is concerned. Because for traditional tobacco products, we've been so successful at sort of linking that in everyone's mind with cancer that kids in general are not that interested in smoking traditional products. But with newer emerging products, especially electronic cigarettes, the risk perception of that has really changed because these are being advertised as safe alternatives. And so now as we're sort of switching to kind of thinking about those products, advertising and risk perception become much more important than access as indicators or factors that play a role in starting to use. So again, the low rate in traditional products doesn't capture trends in emerging products. So here we're especially concerned about electronic cigarettes, but also flavored cigars like Biddies and Credex, and little cigars like cigarillos, smokeless tobacco, hookah, and pipes. All of these are gaining a lot of popularity. And you see the rate of electronic cigarettes is actually 27%. And so that's significantly higher than the 6% of use of traditional products and among youth. And so looking at race and ethnicity here, we see that about 44.9% of Latinx middle school students have reported like ever use of cigarettes. And then we also see that the rate of current use is much higher than sort of what the averages would tell us. So it's becoming more of an issue, and the rates here are actually very concerning because they're exponentially growing year to year. So if the trends continue as they have been, we basically will have undone like 40 years of public health work to reduce tobacco use now with everybody using the electronic products. So let's talk a little bit more about what these are. So electronic cigarettes are battery-powered devices that heat cartridges containing flavored liquid nicotine and other additives. And these deliver the nicotine in a vapor or aerosol form. And so they can look like regular cigarettes, but that actually has sort of gone out of style, and now they're becoming more clever in how they look, and they are creating more and more covert devices that look more like a lipstick sort of container, or even like a USB drive. So they've gotten sort of smaller and smaller. And so we have these in lots of forms. I'm going to show you a video in a little bit so you start to see sort of the variations there. But other emerging products that we want to be thinking about, especially among adolescents, this includes smokeless tobacco. So this is chew, dip, snuff, or spit tobacco, loose tobacco that is put into the mouth. It comes in cans or pouches, dry or moist. Smokeless tobacco is much more common in rural areas. So in eastern North Carolina, we definitely ask about that separately because it's very common out here. And so then the flavored cigarettes, these are the biddies and credits. These can look like cigarettes, but they can also kind of look like thin, small cigars. They're very common in other parts of the world. And so some of the flavors that we see with these include clove, licorice, strawberry, and orange. Little cigars are kind of similar, cigarillos. So here they are typically brown instead of white, and we also see sort of flavorings like fruit, candy, and chocolate. Hookah pipes, also pretty common in other parts of the world, but this has made its way to the US in the last probably 2 decades. Very popular among college students right now. And so here, the burning tobacco is mixed with flavors such as honey, molasses, or fruit in a water pipe, and that's inhaled. And then, of course, we have traditional pipes. And you would think that that has gone out of style, but actually we're seeing sort of a new interest in that among teens and adolescents. You kind of think of that as something your grandpa might have done, but somehow it's made a return. When we think sort of about these emerging products, what is common across them are some of these flavorings. So many scholars that study, the marketing and the production of tobacco and sort of nicotine products, they've argued that these additives with flavorings have been added explicitly to appeal to younger kids because they're trying to get more people to start smoking, since so many people that were smokers have now died, and so many adults are no longer kind of picking that up. So they're really interested in getting new customers, and so adolescents and kids are sort of the biggest target. And so in recent surveys that were done, about 67% of high school students reported that they had used a tobacco product in the last 30 days, and it was a flavored tobacco product. So it's probably the most common thing that people are like looking at right now. And so these are all often marketed as safe and as cleaner. But we actually still know very little about long-term risk. The main concerns here are the additives. And so even though some people have argued that electronic cigarettes are safer because you're no longer burning the tobacco, which causes a lot of the sort of the carcinogens or the cancer-causing chemicals in traditional products, even though that part is gone, the additives that have been added to the liquid nicotine are thought to be a potential cause of risk. And so you might have heard in the news over the last year or so, there was a recent outbreak of vaping related sort of illness. And so this was really interesting because it was the first time we saw kind of like evidence of actual like lung damage and trouble among people that were very young and otherwise very healthy. And so some of the things that came out of that investigation included that there are a lot of black market cartridges that are being put out there, and kids are buying them like not from stores, so they're unregulated and it's unclear what's in there. And again, they blamed ultimately some of the additives to the product as the reason that people developed the vaping related disease and illness. So that continues to be sort of where people are looking for long-term risks. But unfortunately, with all of these things, you often don't really see the full kind of long-term picture until years and years later. So overall, where public health is concerned, there isn't any like official office of health or anything that has said these are safe. Overall, the advice for the public is still used with a lot of caution, and if you can help it, don't use it at all.
Dr. Coral, we have a quick question.
Yeah.
So Ileana is wondering if these are surveys taken at schools, wondering if you are able to speak to the rates in rural areas or for young people not in schools.
If the surveys are taken in schools, is that the question?
Just wondering, I think more about what might the rates be in more rural areas that these surveys might not be able to reach if they're being done in schools.
Yeah, I don't know that they're being done in schools. These are sort of like national surveys that are done, and I can't recall the specific methodology for the youth tobacco survey that's done annually by the CDC, but my understanding is that they include a couple of different methods, so they're not all school-based. My understanding too about the rural kind of urban split is that we're seeing very high rates of use among both groups. Probably the only product that is more common in rural areas is the smokeless tobacco, like I was saying, the sort of the chew dip snuff. But otherwise, where these e-cigarettes are concerned, they're everywhere. I know here in Greenville, we've had lots and lots of new vape stores open up over the last 5 years. They are everywhere, and especially around the campus. Good question. So I want to show you a quick video about targeted ads, and the thing to kind of look for here is the targeting emphasizes novelty, and you'll see lots of sort of multi-ethnic youth trying to appeal to like a broad base. And the other thing you see again is sort of that link with like glamour and like coolness, you know, the same kind of thing that they did with the traditional products early on. So let me play the video clip for us.
E-cigarette makers may say they welcome regulation and don't want to sell to teenage non-smokers, but their advertising dollars paint a very different picture, according to a report released Thursday. E-cigarette makers spent $39 million on ads from June through November 2013, much of it on programming targeting youth.
Parents might be surprised just how young teens are vaping.
The problem, it's now become popular among teens, and a new study shows high schoolers who vape are 10 times more likely to become regular smokers.
Kids worries about the effect these ads will have on children.
All you have to do is take a look at the ads to know that's not the case. Their ads make electronic cigarettes highly glamorous. We have spent decades trying to get rid of advertising on TV that makes smoking look glamorous. They're undoing exactly what the goal of the ban on cigarette advertising was intended for.
Wish that I could be like the cool kids, 'cause all the cool kids Here's John Wayne, America's #1 dramatic movie star. When the cameras stop, John
What
Wayne
cigarette does he smoke?
enjoy his favorite cigarette, Camel.
Well, after you've been making a lot of strenuous scenes,
So now they're taking like famous people to support cigarette use.
can enjoy a cool, mild, good taste.
Sure you do, Pilgrim.
What Camels are. I know, I've been smoking them for 20 years.
Oh, jeez. He's gonna die.
See what I mean?
Nowadays, it's like the exact opposite of this. Like, you have like people with like holes in their throats, and then they're like, don't smoke.
The Flintstones.
Not the Flintstones! No!
These commercials
That's
cannot
not
be
real.
real.
Brought to you by Winston.
Oh, man, there are people would like murder you to see this today.
Winston tastes good like a
I've seen this.
This is just ridiculous.
Children watch the show.
Flintstones?
I take their vitamins.
It makes you wonder what else is bad now that we think's healthy.
So one of the reasons I wanted to show you guys this video is it's actually very hard to find examples of ads online. Like if you Google like image search for like Juul ads or like electronic cigarette ads, they have gotten very tricky as to where the ads are happening. So they're not in print form typically anymore because what we've done for traditional products over time, the public health sort of perspective has helped to ban cigarette ads in like magazines, billboards, really like most places. And so where are these ads? They're where kids are. So they're not really in spaces where adults are. They're on TikTok. They are you know, on Instagram, and they are very much in places where young people congregate to socialize. So they are at clubs, and they are using sort of point of use advertising, like free samples and things like that at like clubs where young people are partying. And so it's a lot harder to regulate what you can't even see. But I think what's interesting about watching the videos clips, and you see that how they're being used in with like music, like all of the sort of the subliminal messaging there. But what is really disturbing is the ones that kind of show you step by step, like how to use it. Right, so we see the young girl in the school corridor is what it looks like, and she's taking out her e-cigarette cartridge and refilling the tank. And same thing with the young man that we see later in the video. So they're almost like instructional how-to videos for people that may not know how to use them. So again, the advertising has gotten much more tricky to regulate because they're harder to find. So we're still worried about that, and we're especially worried about young people. And so bringing us back kind of to like what we can do about this, it's important for us to know and recognize kind of our like role that we have to play in preventing use of these products over time. And we know that assessing for tobacco use and nicotine use with electronic products, it can save lives. And so people that are using these products come in and they see their primary care and they see other kinds of providers like mental health care workers. So it's important that we kind of think about our role in sort of the spectrum of healthcare trying to intervene, and to think about every visit as an opportunity to intervene, you know, when the opportunity arises. So the data is pretty strong that even brief provider advice to quit really helps, and it can reduce smoking by quite a bit. And that's advice really across the board in all kinds of healthcare settings, from medical care to dental care, but also to mental health care. And so the other thing that's important to think about is a lot of times when providers think about intervening, the biggest myth that we all have to face is sort of that idea that smokers don't want to be bothered and that you're going to insult someone if you ask about use. But nationwide surveys suggest that in general, most smokers do say they want to quit, about 70% of them, 44% try every year. But most of them will relapse. And so more provider intervention is really needed. So way back in 2000, now 20 years back, the U.S. Public Health Service published a clinical practice guideline recommending that all healthcare providers routinely counsel patients about smoking. And we've seen how well that worked for traditional products. And so this is still the recommended intervention process. And we're seeing this used more and more now for electronic and emerging kind of products as well. So this 5-step algorithm is known as the 5 A's. You might have heard of this because it's used a lot in sort of other kind of healthcare situations. But the 5 A's are ask patients about their smoking status in every visit, advise all tobacco users, nicotine users to quit, assess their willingness and readiness to quit, and then assist with quitting efforts by providing some cessation services, or at least a referral to such services, and then arrange a little bit of a follow-up, especially soon after the attempt, to try to work through relapse concerns.
Dr. Coral, Kenny put in a comment, and you might get to this, but
yeah.
Kenny Parmenter's sharing, it should be important to note that relapse is part of the cycle from a harm reduction model. Any reduction in tobacco consumption is progress.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we'll talk about that being a key part of the education that we provide. So it takes most tobacco and nicotine users more than one attempt to quit. So relapse is a natural part of the process, absolutely. So I want you to kind of think about the 5 A's as like the outline, like the path to kind of take in order to intervene well. So it's kind of the journey, the process. And then within that framework, we'll also stop and take a closer look at the behavioral micro skills that are required at each stage of the process. And so these are based on a cognitive behavioral kind of model and tradition, but some pieces of this are also based more on motivational interviewing, or like the stages of change kind of model as well, depending on where the person is in their journey towards quitting. So when should you use them? Well, really, these are meant to be used for someone who's willing to quit. So if they are currently smoking and you do the ask and the assess, and they are ready and willing to try now, then you sort of proceed with the 5 A's. If they're not willing to quit right now, then we are encouraged to work on promoting their motivation to quit. So kind of use more motivational interviewing or stages of change interventions. If the person isn't currently smoking, but they used to, then kind of think about preventing relapse as part of what you're hoping to do with them, in addition to whatever else you're working with them on. And if they've been a lifelong user of tobacco or nicotine, then that's fantastic. Just encourage continued abstinence, and especially for kids and adolescents, be on the lookout for that curiosity to try the emerging products, because that's a really good time to intervene as well before they even get going. Okay. So I'm going to go through each of the steps. So first here with ask, systematically identify all tobacco users at every visit. And all of these slides really say tobacco users because, you know, we traditionally think about the cessation stuff for traditional products, but just know that wherever you see the words tobacco users, I'm also talking about nicotine product users in these new vapor electronic cigarettes as well. So the same principles apply. So for those of us that work in large healthcare settings that have an electronic health record, smoking status is usually found in vital signs, and there is a part there that you can stop and sort of check in and make sure that that's filled in, so that you at least know who's using and who isn't. If you don't work within an EHR, or you don't have a vital signs section, then for mental health care workers, we generally kind of think about this as an opportunity to assess during the normal intake process when you're seeing a new patient or client. So consider documenting this in the substance use section or in the health behavior section of your reports if you have that. So it fits really nicely with other sort of health behavior things you might ask about, like whether they drink caffeine or whether they're exercising or what other things they do for their health and well-being. A lot of times when we talk about sort of the ask process, many people that work with really young kids say, well, I don't need to ask, you know, because I work with kids that are still like school age. Like, surely they're not smoking. Or like I work with geriatric populations, and there's no way they're interested in quitting at that point. You know, people are sort of set in their ways, and there's no point in asking. So it's important to sort of get over that idea and to really think about this ask being something that you should do across the lifespan. So not just ask adults, but ask teens and ask young children too. Again, most adult smokers began smoking between the ages of 10 and 16, but smoking can begin really early. So we've had documented cases of kids getting started as early as 3 or 4 years old, and that's irrespective of sort of their background. It really is something that you want to be assessing for really early. The other kind of thing to think about here is smokers of non-cigarette tobacco products often do not classify themselves as smokers. So in like written questionnaires or surveys, they often will deny that they smoke. But then when they do like a cotinine test that looks for nicotine derivatives in your blood, they will be positive, meaning that they are ingesting products, but they don't consider themselves smokers. And so we find that this is definitely the case for people who are social smokers, so those that smoke less than 5 cigarettes per day. And also a lot of adults will tell you, well, I don't buy my own cigarettes, so that means I'm not like actually a smoker. So I just like bum them off of other people. So like as long as I'm not purchasing my own, then I'm not like a serious smoker. So it's important here that you ask about any use whatsoever, even a puff. So normally I will start the assessment by just saying, do you smoke cigarettes? And when they say no, say never, not even a puff, and then to clarify. You'll be surprised how many people at that point already will admit to some use. And then after that, ask about other types of products sort of separately, because we know that folks that smoke non-cigarette products do not typically consider themselves smokers. So they're likely to say no to the general screening question of do you smoke? So especially again here in Eastern North Carolina, I definitely ask separately about do you use chew, dip, or snuff tobacco? And then I'll check for the emerging products. You know, do you use hookah pipes, electronic cigarettes, biddies, blunts, credits, you know, any of these cool things that are sort of new and interesting. And again, you'll find all of a sudden people kind of acknowledging, oh, well, you know, I do smoke some blunts, or, you know, I'll have a cigar every once in a while. And so again, people that normally say no to the initial do you smoke question, if you actually ask a little bit more detailed questions, you'll get a lot more yeses. And interestingly, you know, when we think about these emerging products, what we're seeing is a pattern of poly tobacco use. So if someone is using electronic cigarettes, they're more likely to be using the other sort of emerging products as well. So it gets really interesting, and you want to have a sense of kind of the spectrum and to be thorough in assessing. And so then at the next stage, you want to strongly advise all tobacco and nicotine users to quit and provide clear, strong, and personalized advice. So an example of the clear and strong is, as your clinician, I need you to know that quitting smoking is the most important thing that you can do to protect your health now and in the future, and I'm here to help you. So it's important to be clear, but also whatever you can do to make the message more personal is likely to really hit home. And so here's where we have the opportunity maybe to inject some sort of cultural themes for our Latinx patients, if that is appropriate. But other things you want to be thinking about here, you want to emphasize quitting soon, and to again be as specific as possible. So for Latinx populations, the harm of smoking to loved ones may be a particularly important sort of cultural frame, as well as things like the cost of smoking. So a few more cultural considerations here. So think about kind of cultural values like familismo or collectivism. If the person isn't willing to quit for themselves, will they consider quitting for their family, for their children, for their spouse? Remember that secondhand tobacco smoke also causes premature death and mortality. If that's not something that they're really aware of, it's worth it to kind of think about providing some education or at least some materials that they can take home and take a look at for them to consider that. That often is a very strong motivator for Latinx individuals to consider smoking, even if for themselves they don't feel that urge to really think about it that seriously immediately. You also want to think about kind of their level of acculturation. So among those that are low acculturated, so again, sort of like newer folks that are here in the US, you might want to tap sort of themes like cultural pride. So like, let's not gain poor behaviors now that you're in the US. I find that this is really a good frame to use, especially for parents. New immigrant parents are often worried that their kids are going to become like too American, that they're going to kind of pick up, you know, like values or behaviors that are not great, but they don't often think too much about how they may be doing kind of the same thing. So, you know, you want to sort of emphasize cultural pride and like not gaining poor behaviors in the US. That may be really salient as a message to someone who's a newer generation immigrant, lower acculturated. And for those that are sort of on the other side of the spectrum, if they're fully acculturated and they're a lot more sort of Western in their thinking and in their cultural values, then you really need to tap independence, since that's sort of the core American cultural value. And independence from poor health is something that a lot of people don't kind of think about a lot, but that makes a lot of sense. If you become ill from you know, cigarette smoking or one of these other products, you can lose a lot of that independence that is so highly valued here. So you have opportunities of kind of weaving in that message. And then you want to think about sort of language preference. For those that are, again, more comfortable in Spanish here, definitely there's tons of great stuff available in the Spanish language, so it's more accessible and familiar. But for folks that have been in the US for a while, or that, you know, they're more acculturated and they have no preference or they prefer English, you know, the standard materials usually work really well as well. Okay, so then in the next phase here with the assess, you want to ask, are you willing to quit in the next 30 to 60 days? If yes, then you kind of continue through the process. And if no, then work more on kind of increasing motivation. So again, we'll hit that in a few more slides. And so the 5 A's are for those that are willing to quit. And if they're not, there are alternative steps to follow. And finally, with the assist phase, you want to be thinking about developing a STAR quit plan. So that stands for set a quit date, ideally soon. So like in the next 2 weeks, you want to establish a little bit of urgency. So don't leave it out into the future, into the unknown. Most people will not make a health behavior change that is out there and doesn't have a time frame and is time limited. So you want to make sure that you have a set date. You also want to encourage them to tell other people that they're planning to quit in order to get their support. Especially really important that they tell the people they live with and the people that they socialize with, so that they can be supportive and provide some contingencies sort of in the environment to support the quit attempt. It's important too that you plan ahead and anticipate for some challenges and plan how you're going to handle those, especially the first few weeks. And if the person is smoking, especially more than 1 pack a day of like traditional products, at that point, we definitely know that there's going to be some nicotine withdrawal. And so kind of how to manage those symptoms will be important. And we'll talk about some tips in a few more slides. And finally, the R part of the STAR plan is to remove products and items from the home. So like make it a little tougher for you to access them so that you don't grab them in a moment of weakness. And we'll hit that again in a few slides as well. So a few more kind of practical tips here with the counseling phase and the assisting piece of the algorithm. So set the expectation for abstinence, not a single puff after the date. Review past experiences with quitting, you know, what worked last time, and like what led to relapse. Is there anything that is worthy there of sort of looking back and kind of thinking about maybe changing the new situation so that you're less susceptible to whatever tripped you up last time? Think through kind of like triggers and challenges and how the patient is going to overcome them. And then to think about sort of like associated products. So alcohol and probably coffee are the two most common things that are really strongly linked to smoking, especially with traditional products, but even with some of these emerging products as well. So, you're at a bar, you have a drink, and then you have your cigarette. Or, you wake up in the morning, you have your coffee, and then you have your cigarette. People link these behaviors over and over in their life. And so the two things sort of like trigger each other. So if possible, it's better if the person sort of avoids some of those really closely linked behaviors during the initial quitting process until they get a little bit stronger in their confidence to manage urges. But as you can imagine, that's not that popular. So it's like, not only do you want me to quit smoking, but I have to quit drinking and quit having my coffee too. So it's worthy to like have that conversation and sort of explain why. It's the fact that they sort of trigger each other that, and it doesn't have to be forever that they give up the other things, but it'll be important for their quit attempt that they do. And finally, ask more questions about other smokers in the household. It's a lot more difficult to quit when there's sort of like ambient tobacco smoke in the house. And so if possible, in an ideal situation, everyone in the house is trying to quit, but that probably almost never ever happens, But I think even smokers that are not interested in quitting for themselves definitely can have respect for the fact that someone else wants to quit. And so often the middle of the road kind of thing that they do is they'll agree to maybe smoke outside the house, or not smoke in their presence. And that's a good compromise. You also want to provide some support within your clinic and then also outside of your clinic, so intra-treatment and extra treatment. So, communicate your belief that they can do it, be open to kind of talking about their fears of quitting and sort of the difficulties that they've encountered, but also provide like materials, like informations like to the hotlines and helplines that they can reach out for in case they can't get a hold of you or they're just having a bad moment and they need to talk to somebody really quick. So having the combination of support from you, but also support that's available kind of outside of that context, that really helps to round out the plan so that they have everything that they need to be the most successful during that attempt. If it's not contraindicated, then an approved pharmacotherapy can be super helpful. So this would be medication or the nicotine replacement products. There are some people that are not good candidates for the nicotine replacement products. So if they're smoking less than a pack a day, sometimes the nicotine replacement doesn't help. They might be actually getting more nicotine than they normally would from smoking. So it's not that useful. And also, depending on their health problems and other medications that they are on, sometimes the nicotine replacement products may be contraindicated. So you do want their kind of physician to kind of look over the other medicines that they're on and determine whether pharmacotherapy makes sense for them. But if it does, then definitely suggest that they consider it. And if not the nicotine replacement products, maybe at least the mood stabilizing ones like Chantix or the bupropion might help quite a bit. So we'll talk more about those options in a few minutes. And then I said earlier, provide supplementary materials from other sources. And again, think about their language preference and whether they need kind of culturally adapted materials. There's certainly lots of great stuff that is easily available to us all by just a quick Google search. But it's important that you have probably like a couple of things available to you in your workstation wherever you are if you're to easily kind of pull these things out when you need them. So I encourage you to at least have the North Carolina quitline information in your desk if you don't already. And there's more info on that coming up. Finally, in terms of dealing with cravings, we want to be thinking about distraction as the main technique behaviorally. And so we think about this as the 5 Ds: delay, take a deep breath, drink some water, do something else, or discuss, like basically find support from someone around you, like turn to your friend, call your mom or your parent or like anyone, call your best friend, just talk. The idea here is that cravings to smoke really cravings for anything, they pass whether you give in to them or not. So the biggest thing that you have to do when you're in the middle of a craving is just wait. You want to get busy doing something else so that the craving will pass. And then, about 10 minutes later, it already feels a lot more manageable. It really is a brief delay that you really need to be thinking about. And so any of these can help. Other things I sometimes recommend during this kind of time point for people, sometimes doing like a behavior that is contrary to smoking, like brushing your teeth, really helps if people are really having a hard time with that craving, because for whatever reason that like minty fresh feeling in your mouth is sort of turns off the idea of like I want to like eat or I want to smoke. It behaviorally is sort of the opposite of that, and so that's another nice one that you can use as a delay technique. So in behavioral terms, these strategies are called urge management, and so that's what you want to be kind of thinking about to prepare a person to quit. Finally, with the arrange phase, you want to schedule a follow-up pretty soon after they have set their quit date, sometime in the first week. And when you see them again, if they've managed to quit, then fantastic, you reinforce that. If they didn't, if they failed or they had a relapse, then you want to get them to recommit to abstinence and to try again. And then, use this lapse as a learning experience and think some about maybe other options that they didn't use with this initial attempt, and see if you can beef up the plan for the next try. So that's sort of the process of how to intervene. Let's take a quick look at the micro skills here that are involved. So with cessation, we're really thinking about behavioral and psychological interventions because these hit that habit, but also the pharmacotherapy treats the actual physical nicotine addiction. And so the evidence shows that sustained abstinence in quitting is much higher when the two things are combined. But even one of these will be like partially successful. It's just typically better to do both to really have the best chance of being quit. So typically here for behavioral treatments, the things that you're thinking about are education, behavioral planning, which includes contingency management, stimulus control, and information about extinction, and then urge management and coping. Let me take you through quickly each of these. So with education here, the skill involved is knowledge about smoking and successful quitting. It's important that you talk about the addictive nature of smoking and that most people need more than one attempt, like we were saying earlier. Withdrawal, if you're going to experience it, typically peaks in the first few weeks. So if you can make it about 1 month without smoking, you're pretty much good to go. Like the cravings may still be there, but they're going to be a lot more manageable and easy for you to handle. So I like to get my patients to sort of commit kind of 1 week at a time, and we kind of take it slow, especially in the first 1 or 2 weeks. Common withdrawal symptoms include negative mood, difficulty concentrating, and for some people, increased appetite as well, because nicotine products sort of suppress your appetite. And so when people quit, all of a sudden, like their taste buds wake up and they want to eat everything in sight. So that's why some people gain weight during the quitting process. So it's important to kind of think about that. For contingency management, the micro skill here is recognition of danger situations. So again, you want to be thinking about like, when do you actually smoke? What are the things that kind of trigger you to want to have a cigarette or a tobacco product or a nicotine product? The more you can know about when you do it, the better prepared you will be to sort of face those cravings or triggers during your quit attempt. And so when patients are really sort of wary about this part, or they have absolutely no insight because they've never seriously made an attempt, I often will recommend that we do a period of tracking just to kind of get their baseline before they even make the attempt. Or after they've had an attempt that didn't go well, we will do a period of monitoring before they try again, see if we can learn anything about specifically kind of when they smoke and why. So this is an example of a pack wrap. So it's like a little log that you can put around your pack. And it basically just asks, like, what time was it when you had one? What were you doing? How did you feel? And how badly did you need to use the cigarette or the tobacco product? And so this helps us to kind of begin to see the patterns. Which are the ones that are the most difficult for you? Like I can't do without this one right this minute, or everything in my day is going to go badly. And the others that sort of are just there out of more habit or routine. But that's super helpful, again, in either the preparation when you're trying to get someone to get like ready for quitting, or after they've had one attempt and they want to take a little bit more time to prepare better for the second attempt. For stimulus control, the skill here is knowledge about triggers. So this is kind of related to the other, you know, the prior micro skill. But here specifically, we want to be thinking about the reminders of smoking. So you want to make sure you get rid of all your paraphernalia like ashtrays, matches, lighters, and avoid that ambient smoke. So if you can, establish a smoke-free car and home so that you can have the best control over being successful. And this is really tough. If someone's been smoking in their house, that smell is everywhere, like even in the vents everywhere. So, you know, we usually talk with folks about this, like, you know, can you wash your carpets or like launder your fabrics, including like curtains and things like that. And so often this will, it's sort of like a big job, but it often pays off so much on the other side of you being a lot less triggered during your quit attempt. If you're really serious, then it's something that can really help. With your car, again, you want to give it a good wash. And if you haven't changed your air filter in a while, if you've been smoking in there, you want to change that out too, so that that stale smoke isn't as prevalent. And then finally, you want to provide a little bit of information about extinction. So here, that's really about knowing the power of habit. So critical things here, every time you give into an urge, you're maintaining that habit and you're strengthening the habit. So it's important that you really set that expectation of complete abstinence. And also kind of the opposite of this is every time you don't smoke in response to an urge, you're creating sort of your new normal, your new habit, and you make that a stronger and stronger response. And so if you don't give into the urge, then the cravings sort of diminish with time. But if you're giving into them every once in a while, then it's actually tougher to quit. And so I think it's really important that people kind of know that going into it, if at all possible. And again, expect some sort of trouble with urge management. So this is where the 5 Ds and delaying really comes into play. And finally, some coping skills. So you want to be thinking about what other things can you do for kind of stress reduction. So a lot of smokers say, I smoke because it relaxes me. It helps me to feel better. But so what else can you do? And interesting, the literature around that really suggests that it's often just taking the break. So like if you're at work and you have to take like your smoking break, it's actually just taking the break that helps to reduce your stress as opposed to the actual act of smoking, because that biologically is actually a stimulant and it does not cause stress reduction. It actually kind of hypes you up and makes you have more energy and be maybe a little bit more stressed. But the act of just taking a break from whatever task you are doing can help to diminish that subjective sense of stress. So again, we want people thinking about what else they can do to sort of replace what smoking is doing for them. So here's the information for the quit line. There is a website. The 1-800-QUIT-NOW is the number that we use here in North Carolina. And there's also a Spanish version, 1-855-DÉJALO YA. So the quit line information is available in multiple languages, so not just Spanish, but several others, but the ones in Espanol are listed right here in this link. So definitely encourage you to check it out. You as a provider of any type can send in a referral to the quit line. The form is available in Spanish as well. And there's a place where, like, if you do this with your patient and they consent to being contacted by the quit line, they will do the reach out, like, to the patient. But I always think it works best if they contact the quit line directly, because that really also shows like a genuine interest on their part. So, but either way, I think if they consent to being contacted, then it's best not to waste the opportunity while you have them in front of you. So once you call, what happens is they take their information, they assess their readiness to quit, they connect them with a quit coach, and they provide lots of materials. And they may even connect the person with pharmacotherapy information or coupons or other things to make that stuff more affordable. For people in certain income ranges, some of the materials might be available free of charge as well. And the big thing is they sort of stay with you through the quitting process, and they check in with you periodically. So it's sort of like your own personal quit coach. And for kids who may not want to like talk to someone on the phone, there is a web-based program as well that you can access. So as long as you're over the age of 13, you can do the online version. And both the online quit program as well as the telephone intervention has been shown over time to be pretty successful in like leading to quitting. So if you don't have time to do a lot of the hand holding with them as they go through the process, it's always great to kind of think about that as the extra support outside of what you're doing with them. There are several FDA-approved pharmacotherapies. So Chantix and Zyban really hit your brain chemistry to try to prevent sort of that release of dopamine that happens when you are smoking. That's definitely what Chantix does for you. But the bupropion helps a lot with the mood side effects of quitting. So since that is one of the main reasons people don't quit, you know, they're like, oh, I just couldn't take it. I was so irritable. Like my spouse was about to divorce me. You know, so that really hits the mood aspect of it. And then the others are the nicotine replacements products. And so those come in gum, inhaler, lozenge, nasal spray, and a patch form. They are specifically formulated to replace a certain number of sort of cigarettes per day, or like you know, grams of nicotine per day. And so you have to do the formulation kind of to see what's the best number of milligrams for them to take with their nicotine replacement products. But that's a decision that a physician would make, so you don't have to worry about that as a mental health provider. Just something that you should know so that you can explain that to the patient. So again, the recap here, we want to ask, advise, assess, assist, and arrange with some follow-up. And then specifically in the sort of the part that we can play, really be thinking about the behavioral planning as the most important thing that we can help with as mental health care providers, and also with the coping skills. Man, those really help so much to get people ready for the quit attempt, and probably of all providers that they can come into contact with, as mental health care providers, we're probably the best equipped to help with that piece of this process. I have a video here that I'm going to skip for time, but the purpose of it is to show you how quickly this can happen. So most people say, that sounds great, but that takes up so much time. Like my person's got other issues that I'm working with them on, and I don't want to take the time to work on the smoking cessation stuff. This video shows you how a provider can do this in as little as 3 minutes. And again, kind of thinking this through from a behavioral perspective, we know that sometimes the patient has to hear it a couple of times before they really feel ready. So, you know, don't feel like you don't have enough time. Like if you get good at doing this, it can happen in very little time. But if truly you don't have time, and even 3 to 5 minutes is too long, then you can do the 1 minute 2A plus R. And so that one is simply ask, advise, and refer. So again, at minimum, know about the quit line and have that stuff available so you can quickly pull that up and give it to your patient. For patients that are not ready to quit, you want to be thinking about motivational sort of strategies here. So I'm going to go through these. So relevance and risks, so help them to realize why it's important for them, and talk about more about the risks. And here I think it's especially important to know, what does the person even understand? Like beyond cancer, which everyone kind of knows about, what are the other things they know about? And are there any materials that you can provide to give more information about risks that are specific to them? And then also kind of talk about the rewards, like what's the cost benefit for them? Like what can they gain by quitting? And then, like I was saying, the roadblocks, kind of thinking through the actual process and the fear that people have of quitting and being able to handle that. That's probably the most useful thing that we can do with motivational interventions, is to work on that piece, and then just kind of repeat. Maybe not necessarily in every encounter, but whenever you have the opportunity, and in understanding that people need to hear it multiple times usually before their willingness to quit changes. So, whew, okay, that's all the content. I want us to practice kind of maybe putting this into action. So I have 2 cases, and I want to take a poll to see kind of your interests. And so these are progressive disclosure cases where I'm going to give you like a couple of little bit of pieces of information, and then we'll stop and talk about like how can we apply what we've learned today. And then we'll have, yeah. Here's the
Sorry,
poll.
I wonder if we could pause before we do the poll and we dive into the cases, just to have a little bit of Q&A time, because you've presented a lot of really great information. And we've had a few questions come through from folks. So I just wanted to bring one back from Ileana. So I think with the 5 A's, it's about these healthcare encounters that happen between Latinx patients and their providers. She was asking about, I wonder if there's a link between healthcare access and this provider advice that happens, that maybe there's some people that are being missed, or there are opportunities that are being missed. So I think she was asking about what are other ways that we can reach out to the Latinx community that might not be within the medical setting because of issues of stigma, or we know there's underutilization of health services, and particularly mental health.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if they're not coming in to see any provider, then we're not going to reach them in a healthcare setting. So I think what public health kind of focuses on as sort of the complement to this is more the educational sort of interventions that are more for the general public. So campaigns that are done like in schools, at churches, like in other places where people will hang out, health fairs, things like that. So it's important, I think, to have like a spectrum of intervention targets, but as providers, to also think of where we are as an opportunity. So if you are lucky enough to have them come in to see you and they trust you, fantastic. Like, if you think about that as another opportunity that you have to also really significantly change their health and their morbidity and mortality over the course of their life.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite other folks to type in questions, or if you feel brave to unmute and just go ahead and ask questions on the presentation from today. Go ahead, Kenny.
Hi, Dr. Morale. My name is Kenny Parmenter. I'm an integrated healthcare therapist with Vecinos, and recently my role has been kind of shifted to take on the cigarette cessation counseling, and I've had a hard time really engaging clients in this. When we do assessments for all of our medical clients, and we ask them about cigarette smoking and if they'd be interested in quitting. And if they say yes, it used to be a nurse that would talk to them. It's now kind of my role to talk to them. And I have presented some information from, with the detriments of smoking, and people have expressed interest, but I haven't actually gotten anybody to follow through on counseling. So I guess I'm struggling to get that buy-in. And then I'm an LCAS A, so I do substance use counseling for alcohol and other drugs and things. And I take a harm reduction model, and I think cigarettes fit into that harm reduction. So it's one of our more accepted substance uses in the United States, and one of our safer ones, because alcohol can lead to many more accidents and violence in the home. And then, you step it up to more illicit substances, which lead to quicker death than cigarettes do. And so the cigarette is kind of that long-term health consequence, whereas some of the other substances that people are using is more of an immediate health consequence or more severe. And so I feel like it's hard for me to push, you shouldn't be smoking. First of all, we shouldn't tell our clients what they should or should not be doing. But also just, it's a safer substance use or addiction than some of the other more severe things that clients face.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's important not to approach it like you shouldn't be smoking, but the algorithm does say provide strong advice, right? So it's like, how do we provide strong advice without telling them what they should or should not be doing? And so the way that most people kind of work on that buy-in piece is over time, right? So you may not get buy-in with one single opportunity to discuss, but it may take a couple of opportunities over the course of kind of building a little bit of that rapport, and them maybe even like cracking open the materials that you give them to take home with them to look over and read. And what you're really wanting to do over time is to generate their own reason for quitting, as opposed to you just kind of saying you shouldn't do this. You want hopefully the person to arrive at that decision based on discussions that you've had with them. So I think the buy-in piece looks a little bit more like, tell me about like when you started smoke. Tell me your story about smoking. Like, how did that, happen? Help me understand kind of where you are in the journey, and like who else around you smokes. So you're really just more assessing, like gathering information to try to come up with a picture of like, what are the possible motivators here that may inch this person along the path towards becoming interested in quitting. Does that make sense? As maybe sort of a different approach to take.
Yes, I appreciate that perspective. And like, it is that motivational interviewing that you're trying to pull on. And
yep.
it just takes time to get that buy-in.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Thanks, Kenny. Any other quick questions before maybe we dive into the case?
I had a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm Tina Moore. I work at a middle school. Yeah. And I had heard at a training I went to a year or so ago about how important it is in the way that we educate teens about, this was specifically about vaping, because it can be done in a way that actually makes it seem more enticing. Yeah. And that, some of the, educational programs out there actually might encourage kids to experiment. And so that has left me struggling a little bit with my approach. So I'd love any feedback about how to do that.
Yeah, sure. I think it's true, developmentally teens are at that stage where they're really kind of, trying to find themselves as independent people. And there's a little bit of that rebelliousness that happens against sort of what maybe parent norms may be. So there's a bit of that like flavor that's happening during that developmental time frame. So you do have to be thoughtful, like how do you provide information that's accurate? And I think what's really tough about this is because the tobacco companies are being so subtle and covert in where they even advertise and how they are doing it, like outside of the awareness of parents, teachers, and other folks that sort of helpers that work with that population. We don't even quite know exactly what messages they're getting. We just sort of have a flavor for that. So I think the approaches that people are trying right now are really just about accurate information. So we do know that the biggest message is that they're safe. And so basically we just want to provide like the contrary information to that, just so that they have full information available to them. And then I think it also helps to assert their autonomy as like people that are kind of growing into adulthood, to really think for themselves and to think about their risk on their own, as opposed to like, don't do it because your parents don't want you to, but really for yourself, and take your own health into your hands.
That's great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Dr. Coral, I'm going to ask a question, just being selfish, because I have my own issue with this. So I know you were talking about how to talk to get buy-in from the cultural side of things. And I'm wondering what your suggestions are if like a member of a younger generation is trying to advise a member of the older generation to quit. And we know we have hierarchies within Latino culture that might lead that to be seen as a sign of disrespect. What would you advise to members of the younger generation?
Oh, I would say pull on the heartstrings. It'd be like, if you won't quit for you, if you want me to get sick, you know, abuela, come on. So yeah, I mean, you make it about the family impact, really, right? So like, again, if the person isn't kind of willing to change for themselves, you know, if they were to become disabled or very seriously ill because of this, what would be the impact on the family? I think culturally traditional people really respond well to that. And of course, they would want to not cause their family undue hardship. So I think, again, you know, kind of pulling on the heartstrings a little bit. And I think that's the way to challenge in a respectful and culturally appropriate way.
Any other questions? And I know we're not leaving much time for the case discussion here. But I know we've been getting a lot of comments and wanted to get folks involved in the call too. So I appreciate everyone speaking out.
No problem. So I think what I could do is just kind of maybe present all of the case all at once, and then we can just kind of have some discussion. So let's do the poll, adult or adolescent case.
That sounds great.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, awesome. So more interest in the adolescent case. So let me go to that. Okay, so there are 3 slides. I'm just going to read through them, and then we'll talk about them at the end. So Sandra is a 17-year-old adolescent you're treating for anxiety. She's a first-generation immigrant from Mexico, moved to the U.S. with her family at age 8. You're aware that she's been experimenting with tobacco and some other substances since age 13, because this has come up in your prior sessions. Today, she asks you if it's okay for her to vape during your session. She notes that it's not real tobacco, and so it's safe and it's okay to use indoors, even in settings where traditional cigarettes may not typically be appropriate. She shows you her grape-flavored pack. You decide that you want to intervene, and you gather a little bit more info, and she tells you her dad and her older brother smoke. She thinks that it's gross. They smoke traditional cigarettes, so she's sticking with safe products. Some of her friends use e-cigarettes, and her boyfriend uses a hookah pipe. She thinks that they're cool, and she's tried it a couple of times. Her mother really disapproves of her using the e-cigarette, so she uses a covert cartridge that her mom hasn't cut on is a e-cigarette cartridge. She's tried to quit, but she relapsed, but she's still really sure that she can quit whenever she wants. And you talk to her a little bit, and she decides that maybe, you know, this is not a good idea, but she's unsure. She's still kind of thinking these are safe. Also, she's noticed that her weight has dropped since she's been using this, so she's really worried about regaining that weight. She also really likes how cool and novel they are and all the attention she gets from her peers when she's using the e-cigarette. And also for her, she thinks it's just awesome and that she has more freedom here than in her home country, because there's no way, you know, her mom would have ever been allowed to do this. So let's just have some thoughts here about like what you might do with this case. What are some opportunities maybe in what you uncover as you kind of talk with her, opportunities for kind of discussion and intervention?
And folks can type in or unmute.
I'll go.
Okay.
I'm Lynn from El Futuro. One of the things that I am just kind of getting from this is that there's already been some relationship that's been built. And so that's kind of a key point of entry. The fact that she's sharing these pieces with you and that some trust has been built.
Absolutely.
Is something that I would want to build on.
Other thoughts?
I would just, yeah, wonder about like the emotional side of it, the motivations. And then I don't know if it'd be helpful to talk about modeling, like the idea that if you've seen other people in your family, like it's likelier that you might engage in this behavior.
Mm-hmm. There's something she's sort of doing in this, you know, sort of the like a false separation, you know, of like her use is safe and her brother and her dad smoking is gross. So there's a little bit of like not a good, like being in touch with reality thing, that she's sort of separated her own behavior. So there's some opportunities there for correcting that understanding.
Samantha shares the education piece would be good since you already have a relationship, and then Lynn saying exploring other ways to develop her independence, so going along with that developmental stage she's at.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think with the novelty aspect of this too, you know, the other adolescent sort of thing that's always happening is that desire to be unique and to be different and to be to stand out a little bit. And so, like, are there other things about her that are ways for her to stand out other than this? You know, so you want to really be thinking about what is this behavior doing for her? What are the contingencies that maintain the behavior? And is there anything that you can do to alter those, or, you know, switch to like a new focus or emphasis to help her really break the routine and the habit?
Excellent. I'm sorry, Dr. Coral, but we might have to start wrapping up there because we're running over time.
We are. So in general, again, want to make sure that you guys are assessing for all of the products if you can, especially be asking about poly tobacco use, and then provide information, keep trying. Remember, it'll take more than one time on your end to kind of build that willingness to quit. And definitely encourage you to go to the Quit line and download their quit cards, their posters, brochures, have them around, have them ready for you to hand out when you need them. And these are 3 like other really good sources of information that often have materials in Spanish as well. So sorry we ran out of time, but great questions, you guys. Appreciate your participation.
Yeah, no worries. So if I can get you to unshare, and then I will wrap us up. But yeah, so Sophia, if I can have you re-put the link in the chat for folks for the PDF, should have the links clickable for you all. We will also be posting a recording of this webinar on the La Mesita network. And also we will, so as such, we encourage you all to join our network to try to, so you can stay up to date with everything we've got going on. Can you all see the presentation there where it says thank you and gracias?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I want to invite you to put on your calendar our next webinar, which will be on maternal physical and mental health, presented by Rocio Anderson. So that would be the 4th Friday of September 25th at 10 to 11:30. So here is the link to join our network so you can stay up to date with all of our programming. So definitely want to encourage you all to jump on that. And again, don't forget about our conference that will be taking place in October. And so we want to invite you to take a look at that on our network as well. But with that, thank you so much, Dr. Coral. That was such, like I was messaging with Sophia, our project manager, as you were presenting, like this is so amazing how many practical takeaways there were from this presentation. Just really appreciate your work and for sharing it with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time.